As spring gets closer, that means a lot more anglers will be out on the water. And it doesn't seem to make a difference if it's a rainy day or a cold day. Every time you head out to your favorite fishery, there's always a bunch of anglers all around you. How do we cope with these super pressured fisheries, especially during the pre-spawn? Well, I've got a few easy methods that work so well it will keep you catching fish when other guys are struggling. Stick around, you don't want to miss this one.
Got him. Oh, that one's not bad. Oh, that's a good fish. That's a good fish. That's not a bad fish. Come on, you. Where are you going, buddy? Where are you going? Here.
Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing. And you know what? Every single time I head out to the water, I see more and more anglers, especially this time of year. We just had the pre-spawn and we're moving into the spawn, and everybody around here knows that. And the Big Lake, which isn't really that big at only 640 acres, is the only public fishery, and that means that that's the only real option that a lot of anglers have. Either you're going all the way up north to Jackson, which has got Ross Barnett, or you're saltwater fishing down in the Gulf. But a lot of bass anglers, the Big Lake is really the only choice for a public fishery that they have. So it gets hammered. And this time of year, it's really getting hammered as we move from the pre-spawn into the spawn. So how do you compete with that? How do you, as an angler, go out there, whether you're fishing from the bank or whether you're fishing from a little plastic boat, and compete with these guys who have all these nice boats with all the bells and whistles, and they've got forward-facing sonar and all the tools of the trade? How do you go out there and fish next to these guys and keep catching as many fish, if not more fish, than they do? Well, one of the things that I learned about fishing the Big Lake a long time ago is that pressure is part of the equation, as much as vegetation is. So you really have to think about that whenever you're planning your fishing trip. And you know, we've got some obvious things that we're going to talk about when it comes to catching more fish on a pressured fishery during the spring, and some things you may not have thought about. But before we get started, if you like bass fishing content, that's for everyone, whether you're fishing from a boat or whether you're fishing from the bank, and thinking always about budget, because not a lot of guys have money for all this complex bass fishing gear, then click that subscribe button. I would really appreciate it. This is the channel for you. And while you're down there, give this video a like. So what's the first thing? Well, obviously, you're going to say, fish different water. If you can get to different water that the other guys are not going to, then that's going to always be the first thing. One of the good things about my little plastic boat is it allows me to reach parts of the lake, especially those super skinny back pockets where normal bass fishing boats can't get to. So it's a lot like fishing virgin water. That does give me an edge, and I do use it to great success. But not a lot of guys have that ability. Sometimes you're hoofing it from the bank, and, well, if you can walk it, then chances are a boat can get there too, right? Well, not necessarily, not all the time. So if you can find a spot from the bank, and I know of a few places on the Big Lake that I can fish from a bank and the boats can't get to. So again, that's giving me a sort of an advantage. There are some trails around the lake that lead to some hidden back pockets that I can catch some really nice fish. And obviously, it's going to be a struggle sometimes to get to these places depending on how overgrown it is, but a lot of times it really is worth it. So that's going to be the first thing that we try to do. Locate that virgin water, or the water that's not getting pressured nearly enough. And you would think that all the anglers are going to be fishing the community holes. That's where the bass are going to be piled up. But a lot of times you'd be wrong. Bass understand fishing pressure a lot more than you think they do. And one of their biggest defenses against it is just to move. They go to a different location, and you would be completely surprised at how many bass are in these little hidden pockets. A lot of times when I go out in my little plastic boat, I just explore, and I'm looking for different places of water. And one time especially, I was able to find an area of the lake that I don't think anybody had ever fished before. And it was one of the best days I'd ever had. I was able to fish a frog. I was able to fish a few more topwater items, and I had a great day. It was really surprising to find an area that had so many bass and so many nice bass that I was just able to catch fish all day long and basically not have to worry about any other anglers. Well, I did a video about that a couple years ago, and unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it based on success, now I actually have to share that area with a few kayakers because they saw the video and now they know about that area. It's one of the bad things about being a YouTuber is people are going to find your secret spots, but that's okay. It's still a good place to fish, even though other kayakers and other anglers, they found it too. Whenever you're going out to your fishing trip, look at Google Earth. You've heard me talk about that many times before. Go to Google Earth and plan out your trip, even if you are fishing from a boat, because you can often identify hotspots, right? Those high percentage areas where those bass are going to be congregated. And you can pair that with something like, well, Active Captain from Garmin. You can look at that website and you can get information about not just water depth, but places that other anglers have highlighted with waypoints and markers. And that can be a great tool. So don't ever sleep on something like that. Now, what's the second thing I like to do? Well, I like to throw something different. Again, you say that's obvious. You say that that's a different thing. Well, you don't have to get crazy about it. You don't have to go all the way away from what other anglers are having success on. A good example that I have of that is you have anglers that like to throw jackhammer chatterbaits. And a lot of guys really love those. Those are great tools for catching a lot of fish, especially in the spring when bass are getting more active and in cloudy or murky water, or on days where we've got, not a lot of sun, and maybe those bass need a little bit more vibration to locate your bait. A jackhammer can be great, but if everybody's throwing one, and we've talked about this before, those bass will get attuned and know what you're throwing isn't food, so they're just going to tune it out. What do? Well, I switch to something in that same vein, right? Something that's going to have flash, something that's going to have some thump and vibration. So I'm going to something like either a spinnerbait, which is a great tool. I love throwing a spinnerbait in the spring, especially on those windier days. And I've had success with a spinnerbait with other guys right near me. They'll be throwing things like crankbaits or bladed jigs and having no luck. And I will be right there in the thick of it, catching fish by using a spinnerbait, just by changing things up just a little bit. And what if you want to throw a crankbait and everybody else around you is throwing a crankbait too? Well, change that crankbait up. Maybe go with a different size. Maybe go with a different type. Myself, what I really like to do is I like to throw a rattleless square bill. You guys know that I love those KVD 2.5 and 3.5 size square bills. Those things have been money for me. I've caught so many fish using that type of square bill, especially in very trafficked areas when there's a lot of boats or even other anglers fishing from the bank. I've been able to put together some really nice patterns and have some really awesome days. So that's something that I like to do quite often. You don't have to go in that direction, but think about it. Think about what other anglers are using. Think about what other anglers are having success on, and maybe find that vein just a little bit, but with a variation on it. You can use that to maybe get a little bit more of a bite. If somebody was fishing, burning a crankbait, say they're burning something like a Strike King Hybrid Hunter, which is not a bad bait, right? But you want to use something a little bit different. Maybe go with a square bill. Maybe go with something else that has no rattles in it at all. Or change it up even more. Go with a different type of color. These subtle changes mean everything. And when bass get attuned to what you're throwing and they begin to, tune those things out, you can keep that bite going just a little bit longer. Now, if you want to go even further, which is what I like to do, well, then I'm going to go to something that's completely different. I'll go to something like a fluke, which makes no noise whatsoever. I can fish that fluke weightless, and I'm using something like a 4/0 EWG when I'm rigging that up, and I can fish it on a bait caster because it casts a lot better than you think it does, and I can make cast after cast and catch a lot of fish. And it doesn't have to be on a slick, calm day. I've had a lot of success fishing a weightless soft plastic jerkbait on some really windy days in some pretty gnarly water. So while I'm not looking to see the waves crash over each other, it can be fished on days that have a lot more wind than you think they do. So that gets us to the third thing. And this is probably the most important thing. This is the thing that I do and what I rely on. It's kind of my bread and butter when it comes to being able to keep catching bass on a pressured fishery. And that is think outside the box and get inventive. You have to be able to do that. You have to be able to come up with new ways of having presentations or techniques. And of course, you guys know I have to talk about it. This is the example that I'm going to use, and that's the Waco rig. This right here is just a Zoom trick worm, a white Zoom trick worm. I've got a tungsten nail weight shoved right there in the middle, you know, and it's got to be that light wire 1/0 EWG. This is a Gamakatsu G Finesse. I have to use these because that is part of the action. If I use a bigger or heavier EWG, then it's not going to react in the water the same way. When you fish these, it's going to look a lot like those old banjo minnows, or maybe even a sluggo if you remember those. It's going to fall like a wacky rig, but when I'm working it, it's going to twitch around a lot like a jerkbait does. So I get that erratic action, but I can kill it and give that fall. Nobody else on the big lake is fishing these. Even though I've talked about it so many times, I don't ever see anyone fishing these. And that is a huge key to my success every single time I go out to the big lake. As a matter of fact, the last time I went out to the big lake, I had a boat on my left side, I had a boat on my right side. I threw that exact same setup on that combo that I just showed you. This was the result.
Oop. That's like a perfect 10. Got him. Oh, that one's not bad. Oh, that's a good fish. That's a good fish. That's not a bad fish. Come on, you. Where are you going, buddy? Where are you going? Here. He's digging, but I got him good. Alright. Waco rig, what else, right? White trick worm. Pound and a quarter. Nice little fish. Beautiful little fish. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it. And there he goes. Let's go get another one.
So right after I caught that fish, both of those boats, which saw me catch that fish, started to edge ever closer to where I was and begin to fish a lot of the same water that I did, which, that's bad form. Don't crowd somebody else's water. But I didn't say anything because not long after that, they gave up and left because they weren't fishing the Waco rig like I was. A wacky rig might have worked just as well, but they were both burning crankbaits and not catching anything. So I decided to go in a completely different direction. As I said before, I went quiet, I went soft, but I still wanted that erratic movement. And that's what proved to be the winner for me. And that's how I'm able to go out to the lake every single time and end up catching quite a few fish, even though I have other anglers hanging out around me. So those are the tricks, right? Those are the tips. Find different area if you can. Try to throw variations on a theme. If someone's throwing a crankbait, maybe throw something just a little bit different. Go with no rattles. Go with maybe a little bit different color or a little bit different size. And lastly, be inventive. Don't be afraid to try to experiment. You'll be amazed at the things that you can find that nobody else is doing that can trigger some really good bites. The bass have never seen it before, and it entices them. So give those a try. And I'm telling you, you are going to have a lot more success than you ever thought you could. So there you have it. Some easy tips and tricks that work so well. They don't cost you any more money to try, but they can result in many more fish, not just during the spring, but anytime you're heading out and fishing incredibly pressured waters. Give them a try. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.